All right, you're all set whenever you're ready.
All right. Let's do it. What makes an album important? Is it the memorable lyrics? Virtuoso instrumental play? The voices, fingers, and names that turn a vision into a reality? How it affects the masses in real time? How it holds up throughout time? What it says to you on a personal level? What it means to you? How it has made your good days better and your bad days maybe not sting as much? How it takes you back to certain moments and milestones in your life? Certain records mean more than just simply a compilation of songs released by an artist at the same time. They can be woven into our DNA, much like a movie or a novel can. Albums really can be like friends. Some you go back to all the time and can't go more than a few weeks without seeing and spending time with. While others, you may drift apart for years, but when you rekindle that connection, it comes back instantly. Which albums you truly love, is an intimate conversation and topic. It is not about one radio hit or music video that you can bop to for 3.5 minutes and move on to and listen to a different artist and appreciate them. When you hit play and you are with them, you start a journey with that artist. The ebbs and flows, themes, build-ups, the come-downs, the order of the record, forgotten tracks, and iconic tunes are all part of the same experience. When you physically put on an album, there is no shuffling or editing to be done. Whatever order the artist chose is how you consume that album. Hi, I am Chad Jones, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Don't Scratch the Vinyl. This program is under the umbrella of Big Night Media and recorded in Boston, Massachusetts, just a stone's throw away from TD Garden. A podcast where myself and sometimes a guest dive into an album in its entirety, discussing each song in order. The show will be supplying context to where the band or musician was at the stage of their career and what their contemporaries were up to in their scene, as well as the music industry at large. I will be attempting to show why this record mattered in real time and what it means to music fans today, what we can take from it. I am endlessly fascinated by what parts of culture carry over throughout generations, and why some are regulated to their specific time and place in a cultural context, in a historical context. Both types of records are meaningful and important, and will make for great fodder for the show. So the title of Don't Scratch the Vinyl touches on how when you play a record, as I mentioned earlier, you can't change the order. There's no bouncing around to different songs. The order was chosen for you, so it adds an extra layer of intimacy. You get to soak in an entire playlist every time you press play, and it never changes, regardless of how many times you hit play. So my passion for these songs and musicians and desire to learn more about them will be palpable during recordings. I am yearning to find out more about these albums and why they have struck such a chord with people throughout decades and decades. I care about the important records played throughout history, and I'm curious to see how these artifacts hold up to the modern cultural zeitgeist. This is the music podcast I've always wanted to listen to. So, I've decided to start it myself. I want the show to be a place where young and old music fans alike come to learn and further appreciate the songs these brilliant musicians have given the world. So before I get into the actual layout of the show and what I'll be talking about each episode, I wanted to share a little about myself, just to add context to who this person is that you're listening to right now. So I was born in a hospital right off the Pacific Coast Highway in 1997, and I grew up in Huntington Beach, Southern California, a little bit south of Disneyland. I don't remember my life without music. I really don't. As a young boy, growing up, late 90s, early 2000s, my favorite Disney movie was, by far, not even close, was Tarzan. Partially because I thought it'd be cool to live in Africa with a bunch of gorillas, although my mom shot that idea down pretty quick. But also because Phil Collins did such an incredible job on that soundtrack. I can still recall my mom replaying the start of the song Son of Man on a loop in our white Suburban. I just love that part. My mom knew it. The other Disney movies of that era certainly laid a groundwork for my music tastes, and as I grew a little bit older, they became even more hardened. But a true seminal moment occurred when I got my hands on Green Day's American Idiot CD in 2004. Not only did that album pop my punk rock cherry, It was one of the first times I can vividly recall listening to adult music, especially adult music that was modern, that just recently come out. It wasn't something that my dad or mother, brothers introduced me to. This was capturing something in real time. And I was just immediately hooked. When I first heard that hammering guitar riff of da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na, something awoke in my little 6-year-old soul that has never really powered off. Never been able to shut that down. And that was it. I was utterly hooked on rock and roll. I could still, and certainly to this day, listen to and enjoy all types of music. My brothers and parents were fans of rock, country, rap, all different kinds. I could pretty much take something out of each genre, whether it's the lyrics, the beat, the rhythm, the historical significance. I got you. But I definitely identify as a rock fan. I always just gravitated towards guitar, drum, frontman music. And growing up in Southern California, with my mom blasting Tom Petty, Guns N' Roses, AC/DC, listening to the classic rock station 95.5 KLOS, and the alternative rock station 106.7, the world-famous K-Rock, while driving around with me and my brothers, made a gigantic impression on me that I was never really able to shake. Not to mention other rock gateways. The VH1's 100 Greatest Hard Rock Songs special, that was a big one for me. I recorded that and wore it out on our DVR. The movie The School of Rock came out when I was a little kid. That was a big one, too. Introduced me to bands that I certainly had never heard of. I'd never heard of Motorhead before Jack Black talked about him. Probably the first time I heard the name Jimi Hendrix as well. The Tony Hawk video games were massive. Modern rock, Goldfinger in the 2000s, and past bands. That's where I first heard The Doors, Break On Through. And there's so many more that added my rock addiction. And as I marched through Southern California's school system, it became more clear each year, each summer, where my academic strengths laid and where my weaknesses were. It was obvious. I was not very good at math or science. Never was. Never made much sense to my brain. But writing, cool. History, definitely. Class presentations, being the center of attention as I talk to you on a microphone right now, of course. I could do that. At least I thought I could. And as I grew up, I decided to go through the economically efficient route of attending a community college first, and then I was able to transfer to Boston University, and I became a terrier with media aspirations in my mind. So as a rabid sports fan, rabid sports enthusiasts, I quickly got involved with the university radio station, the great 89.3 WTBU. And I threw my hat in the ring for the sports shows that the station was able to air twice a week for 2 hours, Mondays and Fridays, 6 to 8. And I eventually started blogging, wrote columns for the paper, the Daily Free Press, wrote some profiles on Boston media members, and covered BU's hockey team when I was a senior. But unfortunately, a lot of this was happening in 2020 and 2021. And I don't really need to go into all that, because I'm sure you guys all have your own stories on what that year and year and a half, 2 years really, did to all of us. But a significant moment really struck me in the fall of that year. So, fall of 2020, October, I was getting a sandwich on Newberry Street, and I was scrolling through Twitter as one does, waiting for their sandwich. And I kept seeing tributes pop up on my timeline. R.I.P. Eddie Van Halen. Well, I did not need Sherlock Holmes to deduct what happened. And I was pissed. Fuck this year, I thought. COVID, remote and semi-remote learning, dating was impossible, finding internships was even more of a challenge. My senior year of college, jacked, 6 ways to Sunday. And now Eddie Van Halen, the first guitarist I ever saw in concert. I was 8th grade at the Staples Center in 2012. They were gone. But through that anger, sadness, frustration, I had an idea. I texted my WTBU sports radio co-host that I wanted to talk about something non-sports related to end our show that upcoming Friday. And that night, I did my best to articulate what Eddie Van Halen meant to me. I knew I could not wax poetic about him the same way a 65-year-old former Rolling Stone writer who saw him in his prime, maybe was able to interview him, could. But what I could offer was the perspective of someone who grew up listening to him in a different era, in different context. And I believe my thoughts on Eddie Van Halen, while maybe not as valuable to the professional music journalism layout, could be just as poignant and certainly just as passionate. So I came up with my best eulogy for a man that I'd never met, but who had made a tremendous impact on my life in a positive way. And I started to become more interested in that idea as a form of content, giving a modern perspective on important cultural points of the past that maybe I didn't experience in real time, or if I did, I was very young, but could still garner opinions on and give a more unique perspective. So in the years after graduating BU with a degree in journalism and a minor in history, hint, hint, combining those two, I wrote a few long-form features and trying, at least as best as I could, attempt to add modern context to iconic albums. A few of those bands included Nirvana. I talked about 1991's Nevermind record in my head all the time, and I just thought, I got to put these thoughts into a blog. And that was the first one I wrote about, when Nevermind turned 30 in September of 2021. After that, Nirvana's In Utero, I definitely wrote about that one. Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon turned 50 in 2023, I wrote about that one. A couple big-time ones for me were Van Halen's 1984, turning 40. Obviously last year's, it did come out in 1984. And Green Day's Dookie, more on those guys in a little bit as well. And I decided to take that idea, long-form essay-based features, music opinions on historical big-time albums, and bring it into the podcast space. Now, I understand I'm far from a music expert. All right, I'm sorry to burst your bubble. I do not know every last detail on every important musician in the history of popular music. I'm sorry. I'm trying to be better for the show. But this program will be guided by passion. I hope that's really evident at this point, but the passion to discuss why this music mattered when it first came out, how it resonates today, and what it means to my guest, if they ever show up, and me on a personal level. Because that's what music ultimately matters, is how it moves us as individuals. It's certainly interesting to hear why it mattered to bigger groups, but music doesn't exist in a vacuum. How does it impact your life? What does it mean to you? We'll be diving into all that on the show. Now, specifically regarding which albums I will be discussing, I wanted to kind of set a groundwork so I didn't just plow through every iconic album right away without any really reason to bring them up. So I came up with a method to the madness. Almost exclusively, I will be celebrating and talking about the albums hitting on an anniversary. Basically, divisible by 10 within the last year. More on that in a little bit. This will give some guidance to just seeing which records I pick, because I want to have this show last a while. I don't want to just blast through every single important record in the next couple of years and then have slim pickings the rest of the way. This will be a good balancing. And also, it'll give my guests options to choose from, but also not be so wide-ranging where it becomes off as a little bit too random. All right, so notepads out. Any record that comes on this show, until we get through December, will be from the years 1954, 1955, 1964, 1965, 1974, 1975, 1984, 1985, 1994, 1995, 2004 and 2005, and 2014, 2015. Any important record, any genre can be discussed. Now, obviously, when we get through and go to January of next year, that will change. That'll bump up a little bit, 55, 56, obviously 65, 66, so on and so forth. Hopefully that all makes sense. I know it's somewhat of an arbitrary year ranking system to be going off anniversaries, but I wanted to have a loose game plan for having the show grow over time and letting some artists breathe and not just completely going through all my thoughts on Led Zeppelin in 8 episodes. I want to have this last. And also that just gives some interesting options for my guests to choose from as well. So just to clarify, some expectations can be made for really special guests depending on who they end up being. I don't even know yet, but if they do end up being dream guests, I talk to them about any album. They can talk about anything they want. But until we get to there, generally, anniversary is divisible by 10. That'll be the show. All right, so each episode will include an intro of the band, album, my guest, myself. That'll most likely be written by me, a little bit of an intro monologue. And then each song will be discussed in great detail. Now, I want to make this point pretty clear, too. The show will not just be simply saying, oh, that song's cool. I like that guitar riff. And then moving on to the next one. No. Why do we like this song? What is it about this song that really sticks in our craw? In a good way or in a bad way, if we discuss. Is there a specific moment in the guitar solo? The way the track builds anticipation? A smooth vocal delivery? A thought-provoking lyric? A rocking chorus? Does the song in particular highlight a specific quality that is the band's calling card? Or does the track highlight an underrated aspect of that group and why the musician is an all-timer? And of course, diving into personal reasons. Was that the first time that you remember driving alone and that song came on? Maybe it was the first time you danced with your future partner. All that stuff matters just when discussing songs. Like I said, they don't exist in a vacuum. I'm really looking forward to discussing each song in order, as we can really, really dive into each track and seeing a full scope of where the band was at this stage of their career. One of the main things we'll be hitting on is just what was going on. Was this their first album? Maybe? Biggest commercial success? Were they going through hard times? Maybe infighting, drug use, partying too much? What was going on with them when they decided to make this particular album? Supplying the context will be obviously a huge part of this show. So once each song has been discussed, I have specific categories that I'll be going into, just so we don't completely blast through each song on the album and pretty much just wrap up the show right there. I wanted to add a little bit more context to let you show that I was really thinking about this. This will give me and our guests, any potential guests, a time to really talk about specific parts that come to mind right away when you think of this album. And honesty is important. I want to hear about the certain lyrics, solos, instrumental play, etc., that really stand out on an album that you enjoy, basically, start to finish. So some of those categories I wanted to include mentioned and were all about the 5 bands that mean the most to me as a music fan. When I was first starting the thought process of this show, I wanted to make sure that I was pretty clear on the bands and artists that inspired me and then created this passion that I wanted to talk about. And so there are 5 categories that go into the 5 bands that I thought hard about, not only about what the categories were, but which band and which song represented them the best. So let me explain. The first award given off one of the songs off this album will be called the Pulling Teeth Award. And this is named after the 6th song off Green Day's incredible '94 record, Dookie. And even if you're not a huge Green Day fan, you know the 2 songs that flank this one. Welcome to Paradise and Basket Case are the 5 and 7 on that record. And Pulling Teeth kind of got forgotten a little bit. I was fortunate enough to hear it twice performed in concert when they were doing their tours of Dookie and American Idiot on their 20th and 30th anniversaries, respectively. I was able to see them at Fenway and at SoFi. And it was incredible hearing a couple songs in particular, Pulling Teeth, that you just never hear in Green Day concerts live. And that's the case for a lot of great songs that just were thrown to the other side by history. For whatever reason. Maybe they didn't have the same catchy chorus, or that they didn't have the subject matter that could really lead to a radio play. Maybe it didn't have a music video. Maybe it was like Pulling Teeth and it got sandwiched in between 2 of the greatest iconic songs that the band created. But a big part of this show will be going into songs that you maybe don't necessarily always think about with the music, that you don't always think about with this album or with this band, or that you maybe even forgot was on the specific album. So when you're listening to it, whatever song that me and any potential guest that I have really stuck out that you think should have been bigger and that you wanted to highlight for the show, they'll be given the Pulling Teeth Award. The next award, named after one of my favorite guitar players of all time. He will always be at least tied for first. The Eruption Award, named after, of course, Iconics, Eddie Van Halen and Company's 102-second instrumental track off their amazing 1978 debut album. So this category is pretty simple. It'll highlight the best extended musical solo or just moment that didn't have any lyrics or singing whatsoever with it. As pretty clear, I love guitar-driven rock, and he's a guitar god that means a lot to me, and I wanted to make sure that I was able to shout him out each episode for this show. The question for this one was which Van Halen song to choose from. He certainly left us with a lot of choices to go through from. I really thought about naming this the Ice Cream Man Award. That was a close one. Romeo Delight is an awesome one. The Hot for Teacher solo, beyond incredible. The list goes on and on of awesome Van Halen guitar parts. But Eruption is the most iconic one for a reason. And I wanted it to represent the best musical portion of any album that we talk about on the show. My second favorite guitar player, / first, honestly, I can't really choose between Van Halen and Angus Young of AC/DC. my favorite guitar riff of all time, especially on an intro, is Highway to Hell. The first track off the titled 1979 AC/DC album, last one with Bon Scott on lead vocals. And this award will be given to the song off the album that we're discussing that has the best musical intro. Now, again, it could not be a rock. It could be a saxophone. It could be a violin. It could be anything that's not singing right away into the song. But the reason why I really wanted to hit on this one is because AC/DC means a lot to me as a music fan as well. I want to say this was for my 11th birthday. I know I was in elementary school, but for one of my birthdays early on, my parents got me a couple AC/DC CDs. Two of them included, of course, Highway to Hell and Back in Black. And I just wore them out. I couldn't get enough of them. I remember specifically one time I was in my dad's truck in the front seat, and we were going to one of my older brother's travel baseball tournaments. All this time in the car, and I just kept replaying the Highway to Hell intro. And I kept listening to that song. I don't know how many times I listened to it. It might have been 20 times in a row. I don't think I got it. I got playing to Girls Got Rhythm a lot, which is the second one off Highway to Hell. And I just loved it. It's an incredible, incredible riff. And that can really get you blood pumping when you're listening to an all-time song off an album that you really care about. The musical intro. No lyrics are needed. Now, this next award, shout out to the Ramones, will be for a song that when you first heard it, or when you most recently heard the album again, reminded about how good it was. This is called the This Ain't Havana Award. I know it's kind of a funky title, but it came off an incredible, criminally underrated, rambunctious track by the Ramones off their 1980 album, End of the Century. And when you're thinking about great forms of entertainment and satisfying moments when you're consuming content, a few moments obviously jump out. For sports fans out there, when your team wins a big game, it's nothing like that moment, right? If you're a big movie fan, sitting in the movie theater and experiencing a truly iconic movie in real time, nothing quite like that. But music fans, right? We have all had these experiences when you're first listening to an album that you have an inkling that you think you're going to like, and then that song comes on, and all you can think of is, what the hell is this title track? I got to get this song on my phone right away. Have to. How have I been living my life without this one? And that's how I felt when I first heard This Ain't Havana from the Ramones. And the Ramones also are a band that mean a lot to me. I was probably first introduced to them again to the School of Rock movie when they're going through the montage and you hear Bonzo Goes to Bitburg, but I also probably heard Blitzkrieg Bop before. And they are an incredible, incredible band that I listen to all the time, listen to their albums start to finish, can easily do that. And I think it's important to shout out the ones that really just strike you as almost like a primal notice when you're listening to an album for the first time. You're like, what is this song? I got to remember this one. It makes you think, how did I ever live without this song? So when we're talking about whatever album, I'll be very curious on what me and any potential guests have for that award. And again, this could be whether you caught it in real time, that you physically remember when you were listening to the first time and heard it, or it could also be for the most recent listening, if you haven't heard it in a while, and certain songs hit differently at different points in our lives. I actually had that recently with some Van Halen songs. Like, I remember listening to this album, and it didn't quite hit me the same way. Now these songs are jumping out. All that will be eligible for that award. Last, but certainly not least, of the 5 bands, this one goes out to those guys from Seattle. Nirvana. This will be the Lithium Award. And it's my personal favorite Nirvana track off their 91 album, Nevermind. And this one will highlight this lyrical intro that best hits for this album. So the lyrics for Lithium, in case you don't know that one, are, I'm so happy, 'cause today I found my friends. They're in my head. I mean, come on. It's as haunting as it is memorable. There are quite a few Nirvana songs that I could have chosen for this one. I did really think about I'm on a Plane, as I'll start this off without any words. It's a great one, I thought. But I wanted to go with Lithium. I love that Nirvana song. And Nirvana was a band that I definitely listened to a good amount when I was a kid, but I actually got into them a little bit more later high school, college than I was probably when I was that young. Really diving into their catalog fully, I think, made me appreciate them even more than just going off of Smells Like Teen Spirit and In Bloom and Heart Shaped Box. And I think this is an important one to talk about for this show as well, because there's certain song lyrics that just become almost anthems for people. The things that you would put in your social media bios or yearbook quotes. And sometimes it's the first one that really hits off a song, and it just sets the groundwork for something that you'll always cherish. And it could be powerful, provocative, playful. It could be all kinds of different ways of describing that emotion. But the point is that we had it in the first place. The opening line that hooked you the moment, and it made you a fan for life. Now, those are the 5 big categories that I want to make sure I hit on pretty much every episode. Even if we're crunched for time, I want to dive into those ones. There are some other categories that I want to make sure I hit on, but I can definitely move these around a little bit and either go through them relatively fast or maybe cut some for longer episodes where if there's more songs to talk about it on an album. Time constraints are real, so I understand that. This next one we call the Spinal Tap, crank it up to 11. So this one is just basically the best portion of the album. Now that could be an intro, guitar solo, an ending, vocal performance, any part of the album where you're listening to it and you think in real time, this is why I love this album. This one will give it to that one. What part makes you just crank up the volume so high that any permanent ear damage is well worth your troubles? A couple interesting ones that I thought about for this show as well, again, about supplying context and shouting out maybe ones that are a little bit more underrated for the band's catalog or for this album specifically. Reshuffling history. Was the album put in the best order? How about the intro and the outro especially? Should the record have a better kick, better ending? Is there a time when the album doesn't quite flow as well, maybe because there's a couple ballads back to back and you want a little bit more juice, or maybe there's too many hard songs in a row without a little bit of a come down? What changes, if any, would you make to the layout of this album? And sometimes it could just be that there's nothing that you would do. But I really want to pin it down for me and my guest of, was this the best intro to the album, and or was this the best outro? Or could we have done something better? Reprogramming history is very similar to a couple of the other ones that I talked about. As so many of these albums have songs that became obviously incredibly important, whether they were big radio play, MTV play, maybe also that they were put into songs. There were songs that were put into a movie that became a massive soundtrack. All those things are very, very important to what makes a song memorable for decades after its release, right? But if you were a program director back in the day, what songs would you have chosen to put on the radio? What songs would you have put in a movie? What songs do you put personally on your downloading list? Are they the same as the ones that live on throughout history? Or maybe there's a little bit of a difference. And also this one will be going into basically the best and worst, quote unquote, hit off this album. If it's carried by a couple big time, massive ones that we still hear all over the place in any form of content. Did history get it right? Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't. And that's what we'll discuss here. And we'll also lead into the best and most iconic song that represents this album. If you can only have one song off this one to be the hit that it gets remembered throughout history, what would it be? And is it the one that we associate most with this record? This is another massive one to talk about the honesty of this show. Nobody's perfect, right? What's your least favorite song off this album? Either you flat out don't like it, and you didn't like it when you first heard it in 1978, and you didn't like it in 1998, and you sure as hell didn't like it in 2018. Or maybe this is one that you got tired of throughout time. I think that's certainly relatable as music fans, that you certainly start off loving albums, loving all the songs, or loving a lot of it, playing one over and over again, and then you get a little bit burnt out for it, and you take a break from it, and then you can come back and acknowledge that you still really, really enjoy it. You just don't maybe need to hear it as much. I just want to pinpoint that honesty is going to be very important for this show. If you don't like a song off a great album that you really, really do enjoy, just maybe not quite all the way through, let's talk about it. Classic one. It's very important when we're talking about music, right? Don't bore us, get to the chorus. I was going to maybe, possibly, somewhat, think about naming this the Paradise City Award, because I do really like the Guns N' Roses chorus of "Take Me Down to Paradise City where the grass is green and the girls are pretty." And again, coming from Southern California, it's very true. But I didn't have the same relationship of being a Guns N' Roses fan as I did for the other 5 bands that I mentioned, so I thought it'd be a little bit of a weird move, shouting out GNR and putting them in the same category as Nirvana and the Ramones to me and the other bands. Don't bore us, get to the chorus, right? Classic. Oftentimes, the chorus becomes more important to people than the actual song, the album of the artist. A lot of times, they don't even know who wrote the chorus, what band this is, but they certainly know that one. This is another interesting topic that I wanted to go over. Tattoo or t-shirt. What's something from the album, be it a lyric, cover art, song title, maybe the band's title, band's name that has the font for the album, or the album title itself. Anything that's connected to the record that would make a good tattoo or t-shirt. And I personally don't have any tattoos, but I know a lot of people get involved with putting permanent marks on their skin because they love a specific song or record band so much that they just can't live without it on their body. So that'll be a fun one to go to over as well. And here's some other categories that I want to go over sometimes. Now, this is a little bit more of if it fits the record. That'll kind of make more sense when I talk about the specific ones that I came up with. And also just for time constraints, again, they're real. We can't go through them all. And that depends on the guest, the album, how much time we got. A lot of stuff. So this one's going to be called Shutting the Door. So for you sports fans out there, baseball fans in particular, you guys will know this one. Baseball closer, at home, coming out, crowds going insane. They get to choose their own song jogging out from the bullpen. A couple famous examples of that were the Hall of Fame closer for the New York Yankees, Mariano Rivera, always came out to Enter Sandman in Yankee Stadium. And another really, really famous one is Trevor Hoffman, Hall of Fame closer for the San Diego Padres, came out to AC/DC's Hell's Bells. And those two are always up there in those lists of best closer walkout songs. So this award would be given to the song off this album that would be awesome to jog out to when you're thinking about shutting the door in a baseball game. Very similar to if you're a wrestling fan, how WWE has their walkout songs. Very, very similar to that. This one would definitely be considered only for certain guests that I have on. I probably wouldn't be asking many married couples this one, but Swipe Right If. And this award would be given to the best pickup line off a lyric from this record. Sometimes it would work. What would actually get you to maybe have the person buy you a drink? Or it's just so ridiculous that you just might throw it in their face. Next one, this is one if I have on especially radio hosts, I'd love for them to answer this one, is F the FCC. So I know this one is a little bit more for older fans that had a lot of their experience with songs off of radio and MTV Play where they had to get it edited. Now it's a little bit easier to get songs unedited all the time, or a lot easier, honestly. But there's some songs that honestly are pretty annoying when they cut out the curse words for it. I kind of thought about naming this one the What I Got Award from Sublime. Huge Sublime fan of how when they start off that song, they go with the, oh, fuck you, Kenny. And I don't really hear that on the radio with the same gumption, honestly, when they cut out the other part of the song where they cuss. And that song really, really lacks something, I think, when you cut out the cuss words. Now, certain songs honestly don't. Like, I think Creep by Radiohead, both ones are good. I actually think sometimes maybe even it's a better edit. I like Alice in Chains' Man in the Box version edited better than the one that's actually uncensored. And obviously, so this topic would only really come up to if there's a couple songs on an album that has cuss words. If sometimes they don't have any, so that one would be moot. And if it only has one, it'd be an obvious award winner. So, and as I said, some of these ones are eligible to be cut. It just depends on not only the record, not only the time, but my guest and what they're interested in talking about. Let's say they have a great option for one of those ones, and I'd love to hear their thoughts on it. So now as we wind down each episode, there's a couple of different parts of each ending of each episode, right? This one, the first one, is going to be titled Almost Famous, after the 2000 incredible rock music and movie that came out with Kate Hudson. And so this is basically just like kind of mocking myself a little bit, even if I might not be qualified to put this album in historical context, as if I'm writing for Rolling Stone. I will deliver a monologue on ultimately why this record matters today. Maybe it's culturally relevant today, maybe it's not. But why should we still care about this? Why does it matter? I spent however many minutes talking about the album. Maybe I spent 45 minutes talking about it. But ultimately, why? Why do we care? Why does it still matter if we listen to Led Zeppelin or Madonna or Tom Petty or the Rolling Stones or Run DMC? Why does it matter? What can they say to us today? And I think that's a big point of this entire show, is trying to give reasons to why this music can still be enjoyable and important for all types of music fans today. And I will sometimes be adding like a personal section to this. I have one idea for one of the albums that I've already mentioned today. If I talk about that one, I might just make that completely personal. But as I said, music, how it speaks to us is as important as how it speaks to millions of people. So the real ending, the actual ending, will be, obviously depending on if I have a guest or not. If I have a guest, I will hear what they say about my monologue I just said before, if they think I'm really smart or if they think I'm really dumb or somewhere in between. Whatever their thoughts are, I'd love to hear them. And also what they think is the reason why this record should matter to people today. Obviously, after we get their thoughts on it, I have one other thing that I want to kind of talk about would be where this album falls in the specific band's or artist's catalog. Like, would you put this as the number one song if you're starting to first get into a band? If you're talking about, let's say, stick with one of the examples that I have here of Van Halen. If you're getting into Van Halen, it would make a lot of sense to start off with their first record and then probably hear 1984 pretty early on after that. It's important. It's not one of those ones that's underrated. It's if you're going to be diving in head first into their entire catalog, you're going to want to put that one on. Or is it more of an underrated one that maybe if you're not the biggest fan in the world, you don't need to spend much time analyzing and thinking about? Those ones I think are important to talk about for the show as well, just because it gives me more length to go deeper into bands, but also because just because something isn't historically important culturally doesn't mean you can't enjoy it today. And what the guest thinks about that, where they would put it on their personal one, where they put it connected to everything else that the band did. Now, if the episode is guestless, I would just be doing this by myself, offering my 2 cents on where it ends in their discography. And I would be giving you any housekeeping items about the show. More on that in like a little bit, because I actually have some ones to give you today. So, overall, I am incredibly excited to be launching this show. I'm beyond thrilled. I've had this idea for a really, a couple of years at this point. And I think that it would be able to be serving a kind of a void in music media that kind of gets forgotten, honestly. And what I mean by that is there's so many times that we're talking about music and bands and musicians and artists and all that stuff. And we talk about their childhood, how the bands formed, the touring, the infighting, the drug use, the partying, breakups, reunions, all that stuff. All that stuff's very interesting and important to talk about. But have you realized that oftentimes the music falls by the wayside and that you don't actually have conversations about the physical songs that these artists did that we started to care about them in the first place? Like one example is, how many times do you hear about Yoko Ono when talking about the Beatles? All the time. How often do you really hear someone talking about the songs off Abbey Road? I never hear that one. So that's why I wanted to start this show. And I am just beyond thrilled to be doing this. And I wanted to give you just a little bit of a tease and a little bit of a peek through of which songs and albums I'll be going into earlier on in this show. I don't have necessarily like a set time of recording, but there's a few bands and albums that I really want to make sure I hit on this year, because if I don't, I kind of miss the cycle and have to wait years to either talk about them in the form that I want to or just straight up can't talk about them. The biggest one, honestly, for that regards is Nirvana's Unplugged, which was recorded in 93, but it came out in 94, so it totally is eligible. And obviously the reason why, maybe it's not obvious, the reason why I want to talk about Nirvana's Unplugged pretty early on is because if I don't do that this year, it really doesn't make much sense to talk about Nirvana until I get to maybe Bleach or Nevermind, and that's years down the line. I don't want to wait that long to talk about Nirvana. So I'll be doing definitely Nirvana's Unplugged, either solo or the guest, very early on in the show. Definitely we'll be talking about Van Halen's 1984, kind of a similar thing, not to the same extent of Van Halen, with the Nirvana issue of waiting years and years to talk about them, but this would be the last record I could talk about with David Lee Roth as the lead singer for a few years, and I really want to make sure I hit on that one. Green Day's Dookie and American Idiot, it's pretty clear that I really want to talk about those albums as well, and they had the anniversaries hit last year for touring, and those records mean a lot to me, especially American Idiot, so I don't want to miss talking about those ones for years down the line. I'm recording here in Boston. I got to shout out the bad boys from Boston. Aerosmith's Toys in the Attic turned 50 in April. Really want to make sure I dive into that one, as Walk This Way and Sweet Emotion were critical building blocks in my fascination with classic rock. Really want to dive into that as well. That'll be pretty early on. The Offspring, Smash, and No Doubt's Tragic Kingdom. Also, I really want to hit on those ones pretty early on. As a Southern California guy, I think I could be able to offer some insight into what those mean to me, not only just as a music fan, but almost as where I grew up. Plus, I have a pretty cool thing to talk about with one of the songs off Tragic Kingdom. I have a cool story about that. I don't have many media stories that are really fun, but I have one about that. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. If I had 6 options to choose for bands, I kind of went with the arbitrary 5 because it's a better number than 6 for this one. But if I had a topic and a point to mention for Tom Petty, I easily could have done that for one of those categories. And Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers' Southern Accents came out in 1985. I really want to hit on that one early on as well. Tom Petty's songs mean a lot to me in the sense where they've always been around in my ears. But I don't always associate Tom Petty with albums, and I'm sure a lot of you do as well. When you think of Tom Petty, more you think of his entire hits throughout his career, not necessarily through albums. And I think that, which is why I'm really looking forward to doing the show, is diving into straight up albums and not just going off of a couple big hits from different parts of their career. Really diving into what their message were at the time. Another big one I really want to make sure I hit on, Bob Dylan's Highway 61. Especially after seeing the Timothée Chalamet movie. Want to hide it on that one this year. Don't want to have to wait to talk about that one for years and years down the line. Few other ones for sure are Melancholy and Infinite Sadness, the Smashing Pumpkins record. The double album, that will be kind of a hard one to do, honestly, for the show. I might have to break that up into 2 episodes. I don't know yet, but it's going to be a good one. And I'm just really looking forward to diving more into bands and artists that I know a lot of their hits and know a little bit of their story, but as far as going into an album set all the way through, over the moon that I get to do this and have you hopefully listen to each episode. And I hope to find out guests and have them on earlier on in the process, but I'm definitely prepared, especially for a few of those albums that I mentioned, of doing those ones more of a solo, more of a monologue way. If you're watching this on one of the clips or on YouTube, you see that I have my laptop and I'm reading a lot of stuff off into the microphone here. And I'd be able to do that for quite a few of those records, especially the ones that I mentioned early on. And I'm just really excited to be doing this. Solo episodes excite me. Guest ones excite me. Bands that I know a ton about right now and bands that I'll be learning more about as I go through their discography and their story excite me doing it as well. So I really want to be pushing this show for years, honestly. I don't want to have this just be like a couple shows here or there and then you lose the feed. I'm in this for the long haul. I'm really looking forward to seeing what Don't Scratch the Vinyl can become and where it can honestly lead to. And I'm so excited to be recording with Big Time Media. It's an absolute thrill to be recording right next to TD Garden. The Bobby Orr statue is right outside. And it's a thrill of a lifetime to be able to do this and talk to you about this. And I really want to tap into something that, again, as a music fan, I wish this show existed. I don't understand why it doesn't. Growing up, I heard all about these important albums, you know, like the legendary one, Led Zeppelin 4, Dark Side of the Moon, the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, Sticky Fingers, all these, and I never really had a show that could go into why those specific albums were important. Heard more about the stories or the songs behind their entire catalog, but not necessarily each album giving through a full rundown on why we should care. And if I was 12, I would have loved this podcast. And I hope at any age that you are, I hope that you do too. And I want to remind you that keep an eye out just for social media clips upcoming. I have a Twitter account that you can follow now at ShutUpChadJones. I'll be giving updates and other social clips that I get, you know, on all the apps connected to the actual show itself and not just my own personal accounts. I'm really looking forward to having this thing grow, and please share it with as many people as you want. This would be a great podcast, I think, for uncles and dads for sure, especially with the ones I plan on talking about. But honestly, it's going to be a space for any music fan of any age that care about music in general to hear. And I am beyond excited and really, really looking forward to this entire process. And I don't know exactly when I'll be recording next. It'll be soon. One of the albums that I mentioned earlier will probably be the next episode, depending on if I can get a guest or not. And if not, it'll definitely be one of those ones and blasting them early on. Had an absolute pleasure talking with you. It'll be about this. It'll probably be a little bit longer than this going forward, but we're about 45 minutes in. I'd like to stay underneath an hour, but if it ends up growing and just the show makes more sense to be in a slightly longer format, you can do that too. But really, really, really looking forward to getting this underway. And yeah, follow along. And I am just unbelievably excited to be launching Don't Scratch the Vinyl under Big Night Media, under the umbrella of Big Night Media, recording here professionally in a studio. And I just couldn't be happier to be starting this journey with you. I want to leave you with one other thing. Thank you for listening. And please, please remember, you rock. And don't let anyone ever tell you different.